Let's dive deeper into addressable state. The core idea here is that if it's shareable, if it's historically archived, meaning there is some value to having it in your history stack and using the back button to unroll addressable state. And if it's URL driven, you should be thinking about this category of state. Some common examples are filtering a list of records, right? Like we're going to take that approach for this particular app. A lot of navigation components, they're going to be altering addressable state. We even had some addressable state in this app already by way of the ability to put in a dynamic segment in our route the ID of whatever post we were viewing right now. So the ID of the post, that is addressable state, and we're using that as a queue to go and fetch some persisted state from a database, right? There's also the concept of an anchor tag, right? So you can click on a particular heading in a Wikipedia article or a GitHub Markdown document and pass that link to someone, and they will find themselves scrolled so that that particular section is, in plain view. So these are all based out of parts of a URL and are useful in terms of passing focus on a subset of records or a particular sort order or a subsection of a document, passing that off to someone else or bookmarking it for later. So some key other smells that make it look, that give you, that may be a sign that a given piece of unfamiliar state is addressable. If it affects a GET API call, likely to be addressable. If it's useful when shared, and a key sign that you may have broken addressable state is when the back button, the browser's back button, does not work in a way that is intuitive for users. And when I'm talking about intuitive, I mean that you've broken the contract between a user and a web application. Users visit your site, visit your app. They're not going to go and read instructions about what novel navigation scheme you have that doesn't use the address bar. No one wants to see that. So they expect that it's going to behave a certain way, like the rest of the internet behaves. And these are 4 key things that you've got to make sure you maintain. Refreshing a page should not blow things away that are important. So anything that is going to take more than a minute or so to recreate, you want to make sure that it can survive a refresh. Bookmarks should take you back to where you were, and this is something that as we started building early single page apps, and these were experiences that looked like a mobile app, but they were for the web, you would see a lot of times that people would visit a root of a domain, and as they navigated around, that was that was not represented in the URL. So you'd go to the Domino's Pizza mobile web experience, and you basically, it's one page with all of these divs that hide and show each other, but no way to quickly get back to a particular pizza that you wanted to order. And with respect to the back button, and this is something I see in a lot of Ember apps mishandled, the back button should take you to the last major thing that the user was looking at or working on, and clicking the back button a lot should eventually get you out of the app. And particularly when you're dealing with a client-side router for a single page app, it's very easy, especially when forwarding people through routes, to trap them so that they hit a back button and then they're forwarded again, and they hit the back button and they're forwarded again. It's also very easy to erase meaningful history states. So if you're trying to address that problem and you just say, well, instead of adding a new history state, I'm going to replace the topmost history state, you can end up making it so you kind of remove something important from the user's history, and they hit the back button and they're 2 or 3 pages back from where they expected to be. So a big asset for handling addressable state in Ember is a concept of query params. And right now, query params, they involve 2 core Ember objects, a controller and a route. The route is where you're going to have your query param options, and there are 3 of them. The first, refresh model, that controls whether you're going to do a full transition, it's called an in-place transition, but you're going to end up calling the model hook again every time the query param is changed. The replace option, that determines whether you're going to add a new history item in the stack versus update the topmost history item. And when you're thinking about, remember I said the back button should take you to the last important thing the user was doing. A great example of something unimportant is if you hit the back button and you see like whatever we typed into a search field, untyping itself character by character. So there you've just thrown a bunch of junk into history that is not useful for your user. And the last option here, that just allows you to have a difference between the way a given query param is represented in the URL versus how you want to refer to it within your JavaScript code in your app. So here, we'd be able to use the word page as the name of this property in our route and in our controller. But in the URL, we would see PG equals, right? So in the URL, it's shorter and more condensed. So the role that the controller plays in this, it really has to do with setting a default value. So if null or undefined is okay for your particular query param use, you may not even need to define anything on the controller. But if you want a default value, like if in this case we want to start on page 1, meaning the value of the page property is if it's not present in the URL at all, that value will be 1. Then you need to do this piece of the implementation. So I'm going to kind of walk us through the strategy I'd like everyone to take as they enhance the app that they've been working on, so that we have a clear idea of like the right way to do this. Because there are some serious wrong ways, and I've touched on some of them already, where you abuse the history stack. But I'm going to advocate for a particular approach here that adheres to this principle of data down, actions up. So we want to be able to filter our list of articles by a name fragment, and our API will respond to a query param called search. So if you do search equals SEV, you're going to get this result showing up in the results. We want to make sure we don't abuse our API, and so this means that you may want to do one or two or both of the following things. You might want to avoid filtering until you see a minimum number of characters, like until you see a third letter present in the query param, you may want to abstain from actually going to fetch new records again. Alternatively, you can use an Ember run loop feature called debouncing, which basically will wait for a certain number of milliseconds of inactivity before it will kind of allow an event to propagate. So you pass a function into ember.run.debounce, and it'll basically, like repeated calls to the function, to that debounce, will just reset that timer. And so you might say, I want to debounce this at 300 milliseconds, and only after that full amount of time has passed since the last time you tried to invoke this will everything play out. So here's the general approach I'd like us to take. We have a post route, and we have a post controller. If they don't exist, go ahead and create them. And you're going to have an input in the posts.hbs file, right? That's what we're using for our search field. You're going to want to set up your query param first and make sure that the replace option is true so that we don't untype via the back button as we're updating this parameter. You probably want to attach to the key up event of the input, and then you're going to want to, in your controller, debounce. You're going to debounce something, and that something is bubbling an event up to your router. So you can use this.send to send an action that your router is going to catch, and in your router's action, you will call refresh, which explicitly reloads the model when you tell it to. So the advantage of taking this approach is if you basically use two-way data binding, with the refresh model option on this query param, you're going to end up firing out new requests to the API with every key that you type. And as you backspace, you're going to be like trying to filter the list as well. There's no opportunity to debounce when you have two-way data binding. And so this is the data down, actions up approach. So these are just some common gotchas that, that go along with mismanaged history state, mismanaged addressable state, I should say. Keep an eye out for these and try not to walk into any of these traps as you're implementing this feature in the app. And one thing that I'd just like to point out, this is on this topic, not relevant to this exercise. Add to home screen is a really interesting challenge when dealing with addressable state. Because if you imagine that you have a company website and someone comes in and they're reading a blog article written by somebody, and that they come to the realization that this is a really important site and I want to keep track of this. So I'm going to add this to my home screen on my mobile device, and I'm going to be able to come back to this whenever I need something. That is a bookmark, and essentially that user is going to be bookmarked at that URL. And every time they fire up that app from their home screen, they're going to enter through that blog post they were on when they bookmarked. So there are some interesting developments here that fall into like the progressive web app set of technologies that try to make this a little bit nicer, where you can deliberately ditch some portion of addressable state so that your app feels more like a mobile app. So you start at a consistent spot and don't end up forever having this user come in through that particular blog post and then having to go home in order to get to sort of the root of your experience.